Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Lena Yanez, and today I will be discussing a portion of my research on the Cherokee Nation. In particular, I will be covering the Treaty of New Echota and the jarring legality of the Cherokee removal. So, who were the Cherokees during this time? The Cherokee Nation consisted of thousands of indigenous peoples. The Europeans described the Cherokees as a more civilized nation because they had practices that mirrored those of the Europeans. In fact, the Cherokee Nation was in a trading monopoly with England. They traded deer skins and other goods with European settlers. Their culture followed a very spiritual theme. They believed in a lot of animal spirituality. They believed afterlife. They believed in ghosts. They believed in witches. All sorts of things. They also practiced peace with England. So, what caused the Cherokee migration? The Indian Removal Act of 1830 was signed into legislation by Andrew Jackson. This allowed for the legalization of a forced removal. Approximately a little less than 50,000 tribes who were not a member of the Cherokee Nation. They were forced out of their villages and their homes, their rooted grounds. Jackson wanted to move westward and gain access to more land. Specifically, a lot of the times Americans were looking for gold. They were looking for more fertile land so that they could use it and get some kind of economic gain. Major tribes such as the Creeks and the Chickasaws and the Florida home Seminoles were forced to move west of the Mississippi. Prior to the Removal Act, the Cherokees won their land in a Supreme Court case, so the Indian Removal Act was void to them. It didn't matter. So what exactly happened? A select group of Cherokee men believed that the United States would inevitably force a removal upon the Cherokee Nation. They wanted to protect the integrity of the Cherokee Nation. So who were these men? They were known as the Treaty Party or the Minority Party. The group of men had a few key figures for their party, as most parties do. The first one is Major Ridge. Major Ridge was a Creek war major and was also the head of the Cherokee Nation for a brief period of time. Major Ridge was also the primary speaker for the party. His nephew, Elias Boudinot, was also one of the key members. He was formerly the editor for the Cherokee newspaper, which was the Phoenix. And lastly, John Ridge was the son of Major Ridge, and he was a former writer for the newspaper, the Phoenix, with his cousin Boudinot. Those who opposed of the treaty were known as the Ross Party. The Ross Party was led by the Cherokee chief, John Ross. He replaced Major Ridge of the position because he was deemed more educated. The Cherokee Nation really wanted a more educated, thoughtful leader after their previous Cherokee chief passed away. The Ross Party were extremely vocal about their opposition of the treaty. They consisted of the majority of the nation. My approximate number would be around 18 to 19,000 Cherokees. There were thousands of people that supported him, and the Minority Party were only a very small fraction of the actual nation. The Ross Party was actually suspected of killing a Treaty Party member after the idea of this kind of land treaty came about. And during the creation of the treaty, which took a few years, the Ross Party relentlessly refused, and they ended up petitioning a lot. There were few petitions that came from the Ross Party against the treaty. But the Treaty Party was so adamant on the treaty, some historians suspect a secret alliance between the party and the United States. The Treaty Party was given protection from the Georgia land lotteries, while Chief Ross had fallen victim to them. The Georgia land lotteries were a series of sales between the American government, or the Georgia government, and the Georgian farmers. The Georgia government would come in to any sort of village or tribe and just evict Cherokee households. They would then lot off that land and then sell it to Georgia farmers. The United States government also told the Treaty Party that they would offer the members of the party protection after the murder of member John Walker Jr. The United States also stated that if there were to be another killing of a Treaty Party member, that John Ross would be held responsible. There is no real physical or undeniable evidence that the Cherokee Treaty Party and the United States government with Andrew Jackson had some sort of alliance. This is really just historical speculation, but it's interesting to see the pathway on which the American government took with the Treaty Party. They became not necessarily close, but their motives kind of became intertwined. If you scratch my back, I will scratch yours, that type of thing. So the story of how the Treaty Party created the New Echota Treaty is sort of complex, but I made a brief timeline. In 1834, Andrew Ross, who was the blood brother of Chief Ross, had brought the idea of the treaty to the nation in 1834. This was then why the Cherokees had such a rage of fury and killed the member John Walker Jr. The first treaty conference was in the winter of 1834. Here the United States offered a little over $3 million for the Cherokee Nation, or the Cherokee land. The price was then raised to $4.5 million, but Chief Ross was definitely not happy. He demanded at least $20 million, which the United States thought was ridiculous. Following that long conference, a United States official was ordered to get the Treaty Party to sign a draft of the treaty. This was in Elias Boudinot's New Echota residence, thus why it is named the Treaty of New Echota. This is where the initial draft was created, the initial signing. It was done in secrecy. The Ross Party had no clue that this was happening. The conference at Red Clay offered a treaty to both the Ross Party and the Treaty Party, which they both refused. The Treaty Party did this out of fear. They feared the consequences of agreeing to the party in the presence of the Ross Party. The final conference in December of 1835 was when the Treaty Party had an official signing. The Ross Party did not attend this conference. The treaty was then ratified months later by the United States. The treaty itself was signed by less than 100 Cherokees, but it was witnessed by approximately 500. The Ross Party represents likely the 18,000 to 19,000 figure I mentioned before. The Treaty Party went against a massive majority of people just because they felt that they were right, they felt that they needed to do something for the nation, and that this was for the nation. Within this treaty, the United States gave the Cherokee Nation $5 million. They also received land in modern-day Oklahoma. Jackson gave the Cherokee Nation approximately 2 years to relocate, which many refused to do because the Treaty of New Echota was never recognized by Cherokee law. These Cherokees who refused to move would soon face the atrocities forced upon them by the United States government. The path of the migration stretched from northern Georgia to eastern Oklahoma. It is estimated that 16,000 Cherokees were on that trail. Some Cherokees did move prior to the 2 years ending. 16,000 Cherokees were on the trail. About 4,000 Cherokees died due to the conditions. Here beside the map is a quote from a reverend. He journaled along the way with his detachment. That is what they were called. Cherokee Indians were placed into detachments of about a couple hundred to possibly 1,000. After the migration, the Cherokee Nation reestablished in Oklahoma. It took obviously a couple years to really get a sturdy foundation, but they were able to create a similar sort of society. And in case you are wondering, the men of the Treaty Party, they were absolutely brutally slaughtered in 1839. Here are a few of my references. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned something.